item C. So the district banks have to propose a cut in the discount rate if they think it's appropriate. So here, if you look, only 4 banks, Boston, New York, Cleveland, and San Francisco, actually came to the meeting and proposed a rate cut. 8 banks didn't. That tells you, see, they proposed a 0.5, and that was approved. Everyone else proposed something else. They might have proposed 0.25, they might have proposed 0. They'll have to re-propose those because they weren't approved. They're only telling us the ones that were approved. So they only approved the ones that were consistent with the actual policy move, which was lower it by 0.5. So the other 8 banks proposed something else, and it probably wasn't more aggressive. It probably wasn't 0.75. So this tells you something important that people miss when they read this. Even though the vote was unanimous, the support was actually somewhat weak, because 8 of the banks coming in didn't want a 0.5 rate, or they would have proposed it. They went around the table and everyone agreed to support that move, but that was only after talking about it. And the other thing I want to point out is I've been saying there's a half-point difference between the federal funds rate and the discount rate. At some point I forgot about, I apologize, they went to 0.25%. So the discount rate is only 0.25% above the target federal funds rate. I forgot to post it, but if you're interested, I thought I had it here in feed. Whether it is FedWatch. You take a look at this if you want. It's Tim Dewey's FedWatch for today. He expects more easing in the future. So you take a look at that. Also, I don't know if you're interested, I'll just point it out. It's embarrassing. There's also a story here at the PBS website.
Do you think the Fed will go down to 0%?
I don't think so. If you're interested in a story on the PBS website about me. I think they'll probably end up going lower, but I don't think they'll go to 0 at this point. I don't see 0 in our future. I hope not. We shall see.
What makes the other banks not on the same page as
So conditions will vary by region. And each bank will look at the conditions in their region and make a call as to what they think the best move is for them. And so because regional conditions vary, they come up with different prognoses for what needs to be done. And so the housing crash might be much worse in a dense state where housing prices really went up. You have a lot of property restrictions, as opposed to a state with a lot of land that didn't have as much of a price bubble. So they might see the problem very differently, and they might worry differently. And then there's just different assessments about the relative importance of inflation. So some of the Fed presidents are much more inflation hawks than others. So Bosser, for instance, is very, very hawkish. So he's reluctant to lower rates. He probably went along with it reluctantly, but he and Gary Stern at Minneapolis and others, the guy at Dallas, Richard Fisher, are all very hawkish. So I'm guessing they probably came to the meeting all wanting to go quarter, even that. And there's a lot of people that don't really think, me included, that these rate cuts are going to do much good. They're mainly a feel-good placebo effect for financial markets to say we're paying attention, but the real thing is really the loan markets and getting loans and credit flowing again, and these kinds of acts probably, it'll have a little bit of effect in valuation, asset valuations and things like that, the present value formula. So it helps on balance sheets and things like that. But I don't think we're going to get a lot of investment boom lowering this. So to expect to get a lot of real economic effects out of it, I don't think we will. But it does change a lot of asset sheet valuations because you take 1 over 1 plus I, when I goes down, you get higher values. And so it sort of helps with solvency and things like that in ways that use these complicated ways.
Why do they not allow different rates for the different districts?
So that the banks can arbitrage. Otherwise, businesses would tend to locate, and you would then get competition amongst the banks for business by setting the rates in your district, and they don't want to have that interstate competition would be one reason. So it just makes the playing field even for everyone rather than having it. In 1913, I think that was much less of a concern. People could pick up and move at the drop of a hat and still shape things and do things, so they didn't have to worry. Things were much more regional in terms of the economy's become much more integrated nationally. And as it does, it's sort of important to have uniform incentives across the regions. Anything else? Okay. It just looks like this. Okay. So what are the 3 traditional tools of monetary policy? Last year I didn't write traditional. This year there's a bunch of new tools, and I'm going to talk about those a little later in the course. For now, I just want to stick with sort of the traditional stuff. 10 years from now, all the new stuff will be closed back down. So this is sort of the temporary facilities that they're using. But traditionally, if you want to change the money supply, what are the 3 tools available to the Fed?
Open market operations.
Open market operations is one way.
Discount rates.
Discount rate. That's it. All right. And reserve requirements. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. You can read about them in the book. A lot of it's changed. But open market operations really come in 2 flavors. There's defensive and there's dynamic. And these are really, defensive is you're just keeping the car on the road. And dynamic is when you actually make turns. And so a lot of what the day-to-day open market operations are, if you have a target federal funds rate, say FF star here, that's your target. If you were to do nothing as the Fed, the car would slowly drift off the road and eventually hit a tree and the economy would crash. And so a lot of the day-to-day operations are just defensive to keep the federal funds rate as close to the target as they possibly can. Before the crisis, about a 0.02 variation each day. If it was, the target was 4%, it might be 4.02 or 3.98 in a given day, but they kept it pretty tight on target. Lately, there's been a huge variance in this thing. We've been having trouble keeping it on target, as we've talked about, and that's part of the reason for this corridor system that's been narrowed, is to try to maintain these fluctuations. So that was a defensive move. Then the dynamic move was like we had yesterday. That's when you actually change. So these are all defensive, and this is dynamic. So that's actually when you change the direction of monetary policy. You turn the car on a new road, and now you have defensive again to try to keep it together. If you actually look at the effective rate, it looks like they were sort of down here already a few weeks ago. They let it sort of drift down over time, and then they sort of validated that. Those are the two terms. Discount window. There's different kinds of loans you can get here. There's basically overnight kinds of loans. There's short-term loans. There's sort of overnight, shorter term, and longer term. And I'm not going to go through all the different types and things. But there's just various terms that you can get from the Fed depending upon what your needs are. So they're willing to lend overnight. If you're in big trouble and need a loan for a longer period of time, you show them that you have plans for getting out of your problems. They'll make loans for longer periods of time. But anyway, this is just where you loan banks money. There's various ways they do that. Now, the U.S. in the past used this mainly to control the money supply. Other countries often use discount window operations. The reason is that in a lot of countries, they don't have a big enough financial market to conduct open market operations without their central bank being the biggest player in it. The open market operations, the buying and selling of T-bills, would be so large relative to the size of their financial markets that it just doesn't work. Here, the Fed's not a huge player in the market. But there, they'd be so big that they would just dominate the markets, and anything they did would have huge effects on interest rates and stuff. So those countries typically use discount rate operations rather than open market operations to control the money supply. So the typical way to do it in just a random country would be through discount window. When you want the money supply to go up, you lower the discount rate to encourage borrowing. When you want it to go down, you raise the discount rate to lower borrowing. And that's how a lot of countries control, because nobody changes this much. The reason is when you change reserve requirements, it has it's a big hammer. A tiny change in reserve requirements has a huge change on the money supply. It's 1 over R, so it's leveraged into a big number. And when you change that a little bit, it has a big expansion effect on the money supply. So this is just too powerful, and they don't change this very often. It's been changed a few times, but mostly they don't change this at all. These two change the monetary base. This one changes the multiplier. Just think of the simple multiplier. It's 1 over the reserve requirement. And so if you went from 0.1 to 0.05, you'll change the multiplier from 10 to 20. That's a huge change in the money supply. So it's hard to use this to fine tune. It's just too powerful to fine tune. So typically we choose one of these two. And the U.S. now, with the corridor system, is really moving towards a discount window style control of the federal funds rate rather than open market operations. So now they're relying upon this notion that you have a supply of reserves that looks like this. This is the discount rate. And this is the, we don't have, we call this the loan rate last time, the rate they'll pay on reserves. So this is the rate they pay on reserves. And we can think of this all done through one window. You go to the same window to make deposits or take out loans and just call it the discount window. So we're mostly moving towards a discount window style of operation. And increasingly over time, they'll move away from open market operations. They like this better. Smile at any of you today. Is this the 5th week? So you have tests the 3rd week, the 4th week, and the 5th week. And the 6th week, you kind of get a little linear. And it starts back up again the 7th week. And it starts in, so I see it. It's that time of year. Summer's really over. Promise yourself you'll do better. So you did that homework. Do you have any questions on this model before I move on to something new? I want to make sure you have this down. This reserve supply, reserve demand model. Do you have any questions about how it works or anything before I move on?
So on the graphs that you're drawing, all the, I guess, supply ones were labeled MBN, which is the non-borrowed. So when you change things in borrowed, unless you're changing the discount rate, does that mean there's no effect? Well, okay, I guess I'm referring to the question that said there's a change in how much you borrow from the Fed. Unless you change the discount rate, which would affect borrowing, does that mean that the federal funds rate and everything on that graph is just going to be not affected?
If you change the discount rate?
Yeah, that's sorry.
Yeah. So let me show you. There's sort of two cases there.
Right.
So let's say that you're sitting here just to make it. Is my dyslexia showing? Not really. If you lower the discount rate that much, no effect. If you lower it that much, then you get an effect.
Can you change borrowing without affecting the discount rate? I didn't know if it was like a trick question where you realized no, because all we're talking about on that graph is not.
I don't remember the question. So what?
It was something like draw the graph how it affects the federal funds rate if there's a change in borrowing from the Fed. And I didn't know if you meant by changing in borrowing you meant that there was a change in discount rate or
I meant
borrow.
change the discount rate.
Okay.
So there's two different cases there. There's this one and this one. If I'm thinking about it right, that's what I meant.
Yeah. Okay.
I hope I'm hearing you right. Because there's there's really three cases I wanted to do. I wanted to do open market operations, which shifts this line.
Okay.
I wanted to do a change in the discount rate, which shifts this line.
Okay.
And I wanted to do a change in reserve requirements, which shifts this line.
Okay.
So this one is open market operations. This one is the discount rate. And this one is reserve requirements.
So borrowing habits doesn't change unless the Fed changes its discount rate?
Unless we change the incentive somehow.
Okay.
Now, this demand could change if risk changes or something like that.
Okay.
But so that if you lower the discount rate, there's really two effects. There's one where you have no change at all, and this is the opposite. If you raise this thing, there's no effect unless you cross this line. So we can do the opposite too. Where we had this, and we ask, what happens if you raise the rate you pay on deposits? Well, it doesn't have any effect until you cross that line. Then you both raise the discount rate and end up with negative discount loans. People will be putting money in the window rather than taking it out.
So there's no effect in the discount rate by raising it or lowering it?
Until you cross this point.
So until you lower it below equal.
There's an effect in the sense of there's a higher probability that you'll hit the ceiling if demand goes out. But there's literally no change in the if you just drop that, I should have complicated it.
Okay.
There's no change on the graph other than this line falls to there. Because this is the equilibrium. And until you distort that equilibrium, you're not going to change anything. So it's not until you get down to here, so this line won't do anything. But here, now you've distorted the equilibrium, because you can't, this is gone.
So on the question, does borrowing from the Fed, has it affect the federal funds rate? You're really asking
About the discount
how-
rate.
the discount rate.
Yeah, I really worded that poorly, and I apologize. I see that now. So I will take that into account when you're all here. I was hoping you'd open up the book and just copy the 3 cases in the book, because that's exactly what I wanted. And it sounds like that's what most of you did. And then put this other tail on it. So everyone's going, okay, that's what I did. Okay, I'm happy now. And maybe take a few minutes to understand what you were writing on the paper. That was my hope. But if not, there's the dang answer. That's why you come to class, I guess. I don't care if I take any points off or not. I just want you to understand it. This is great. So there's only 4 things I can ask you on this. Something that makes this line move, something that makes that line move, something that makes that line move, and something that makes that line move. So we gave what reasons? This we've talked about 5 things and it can hit that model. Here's reserve supply. This is reserve demand. And you would expect this to be the federal funds rate. This will shift for what reasons? There's 2 of them. Yeah, reserve requirements or riskiness. And if either one of these go up, this goes up, where's demand go? Up. And if risk goes up, what do? You go into cash, so the demand for reserves goes up. So both of these raise demand. This point here, as I said here, this one's the open market operations. So it just slides along, pulls this out, kind of cuts that off. So you can just slide this back and forth. Someone called it a trombone. That's kind of a good visual. Good job. This line here is the discount rate. And this is the rate they pay on deposits. Reserve deposits. So once you cover all those cases, that's all I can ask you.
So when the Fed increases the non-borrowed monetary base through open market operations, do they necessarily lower the discount loan rate?
Yeah, because that'll shift this out. It'll pull that line over and it'll chop that off. So it'll go here. And it'll lower it down to that point.
But does the top line move down as well? Do
They would lower this, and they would also lower this. So they would probably, what they did yesterday was take this whole thing and move it down diagonally. So yesterday they just took this line and they sort of moved it like that. And that distance is 0.50. Because they had to lower the discount rate, that's what that thing at the bottom is all about. And then they have to lower, this is a fixed distance as well. No, they won't go below 0. This is 0.25. The lowering was 0.5. The distance here, this is 0.25.
month rate, but also change the discount rate and I guess the floor.
And I think, having been wrong on the discount rate, I'm going to just think rather than assert, this is 0.65 below. But I could be wrong about that. It's a fixed distance though, and it does move. I've been meaning to check and make sure it's still 0.65. They keep changing these things. And there are no books that have this, so we just have to do it here. Okay. Oops. Well, I'm assuming you have plenty of time. Get that into your heads. If not, we've got a permanent record. There are. Yay. So we're done with money supply. We know how money's supplied now. We know how, the money supply is the multiplier times the monetary base. This is all about controlling the monetary base and so on. So we're going to move on to money demand. Because we want to build a model where we have money demand and money supply and the interest rate. So we know a lot about this through this model over here. We'll connect the two soon. Now we need to learn something about this. Put them together, then we can start talking about IS and LM curves, and then really do monetary policy the way we should have been doing. Here it is. So let's look at this. We're going to go back and do a little of the history, because it's a good way to sort of figure out what money demand is all about. So we'll go back to the quantity theory of money. And we'll associate this with Irving Fisher, 1911, who was pretty famous, still is, but made a big mistake on the stock market crash in '29. He said there was nothing to worry about. He was bullish. Not a big paper. So the point we're going to get to is that for these people, money demand only depends upon income, not on the interest rate. We want to trace how the interest rate came to be part of the money demand function. So we're going to go back to a time when it only depended upon income and see how that works. So what we need to do first is define the velocity of money. So we're going to define the income velocity of money. And this is a definition. So this is identically true. V is defined as Py over M. Py is nominal GDP. P is just the implicit GDP deflator, and Y is real GDP. P times Y is nominal GDP. It's just your standard breakdown of nominal GDP into price times real. M is money. So suppose this were 10,000, and the money supply is 2,000. What's velocity then? It's going to be 10,000 over 2,000 equals 5. What does that mean? So what's Py defined as? That's the total amount of goods and services sold within the U.S. borders in a specified period of time, so long as they pass through organized markets. I think I covered all the 202 definitions. So it's a measure of how much money changes hands in final goods and services. And GDP tells us how much stuff was sold, how much money changed hands. If this is how much money changed hands for final goods and services, and that's how much money we have, how many times did we re-spin the average dollar? 5 times. That's what velocity means. It's how fast money moves. Think of it this way. You work somewhere, at the end of the month they pay you, so all the money builds up in employee bank accounts. They go out and buy stuff. The money builds back up into the business bank accounts. And at the end of the month they pay all their workers. And they go buy stuff again, and the money goes in that circle. In the US, about 7 times is what this is. Velocity is about 7. So 7 is a pretty good measure of how fast. Now, if you use M2 here, in GDP here, you get about 7, I believe. And M1. M1 is 7, M2 is a little lower. So you get about 7. So the average dollar changes hands about 7 times. And I put a picture of velocity on the web page. I won't take the time to pull it back up. But if you're interested in seeing what it looks like over time, it's there. We'll come back to this concept later. So this isn't a theory. This is just a definition. Now, Fisher thought V changes as the efficiency of payments change. We'll do an example of this later and actually show you this. Cash machines would increase the efficiency of payments. Anything that makes that money easier to go in a circle will increase the efficiency of payments. So allowing banks to send checks by PDF makes money move faster through the banking system. Anything that gets that money circulating faster, if businesses pay their workers more often, so you get that money jumping back and forth. I did it once a month. In my idealized model, you get a velocity of 12. If they pay bi-weekly, you get a velocity of 24 because the money moves faster. So anything that sort of affects how fast that money changes hands would affect velocity. So we expect velocity to rise over time as we get more efficient at using our money supply. You don't have to carry as much. You used to have to carry a whole lot of money around in your pocket. So you can see people at the beginning of the month get big wads of money at the beginning of the month. Some old guys still do this. They don't know you have cash machines. They carry around these big wads of money, and the money just sit in their pockets idle doing nothing. And now people just go to cash machines. They're all over the place. You don't have to carry a bunch of money. You can go there a lot. You don't have to drive to the bank and wait in line and get your money out. So you take less out with each transaction. That's a more efficient system, and money tends to sort of, you need less M. This could be smaller, and its velocity goes up. So all those kinds of things. But he thought, so V changes as the efficiency of payments change, but he thought this happens slowly. Slow enough that it's okay to model V as a constant. So V is constant in the short run. That's what I want to emphasize. This is not a theory because it's not falsifiable. This is identically true. It's always true. You can't have a theory unless it's falsifiable. You have to assert something that could be proven wrong before it's a theory. So we're going to rewrite this. This is now the quantity theory. That was the quantity equation. Here's the quantity theory. So the quantity equation is just MV equals PY. But if you plug V in, what's V? Py over m, so you just get Py equals Py. This is always true. This has to be true. That's the quantity equation. This is the quantity theory that's going to be mv bar equals Py. So we're saying that V is a constant. And that may or may not be true. That's falsifiable. But if it's true, what's this say? This predicts what? When m goes up, what happens to Py? It goes up. Why is that falsifiable? What if when m goes up by 1%, V goes down by 2%? What would happen to Py? It would go down instead of up. So this may or may not be true. This is a prediction from a model. It's based upon an assumption. If that assumption's wrong, the prediction's wrong. So you can test this. It actually tells you more than that. It tells you that Py over m should be constant. But if you double this, you double that. So if you don't get that doubling relationship in the actual data, this model is wrong. So this is an actual theoretical statement. Now the classical economists often assert as well, so the classicals, this is pre-Keynes, remember, neoclassicals technically for the history of thought people, but for the classical economists, they felt, why do we care about their feelings? They thought that y was constant as well in the short run. You could model y as a constant. So for them, you have mv bar equals py bar. So now you get a stronger prediction. This is even, now when m goes up, what happens? Just pre goes up. So if y is invariant to changes in m, if money is neutral, if money doesn't affect output, if this is driven just by real factors like a real business cycle person would tell you, technology, capital stock, labor, those sorts of things, if that's all that determines this, it doesn't depend upon m, then we should have a one-to-one relationship between m and p if velocity is constant. Right now, one of the worries is that velocity is dropping like a rock. We'll come to that. All right. Now we can do the quantity theory of money demand. So we're just going to take this equation and say money demand is 1 over V bar times Py. And we'll write MD as K, Py, where K is that. And this is assumed to be constant in the short run. And maybe Y is too, it doesn't matter. So this is a transactions-based demand for money. Remember, there's what are the 3 reasons for holding money? Transactions demand. We haven't actually gotten to that. What are the three things money does for you? One reason you hold money is for transactions, just to buy goods and services. You might also hold it for speculative purposes, and that's where the interest rate will start coming in. But this doesn't recognize any sort of speculative demand for money. It doesn't recognize any role for the interest rate. This says the only reason you demand money is to carry out transactions. So this is how much stuff you buy. Some fraction of that is money demand. So you can think of this as an individual. If this is your nominal income, if you buy more, some fraction of that is the average amount of money you hold each month. So if your income's $1,000, maybe you hold on average $100 in your pocket during the month or something like that. Whatever you hold in your checking account on average during that month. And this assumes it's just some constant fraction. And we say, well, if your income goes higher, you tend to carry more money around because you buy more stuff. So the higher your income, the more stuff you buy, the more money you need. And this ratio stays constant for the classical economists. Unless the efficiency of payments changes, when V goes up, K goes down, and you carry less money for transactions. So this is that's the important part for now. This is transactions based money demand. And the interest rate does not appear. So in the classical theory of money demand, there's no role for the interest rate. So you probably wrote something like MD over P is L of Y and I when you did money demand in your 300 level course. That would be gone for classical economics. It's just P, Y, and M. And this is homogeneous of degree. Well, don't worry about it. You can put that P in there. It's homogeneous of degree 1 construction. Now over across the pond, across the ocean, over in Cambridge, so this is in the U.S., this year's in the U.S., over in Cambridge, there's a different approach. So there's a Cambridge approach to money demand. And this is the tradition Keynes is going to come out of. And this is where we're going to get the interest rate coming in as a factor affecting money demand. So we're thinking about people like Pagoo, Marshall, main names here. They're writing about the same time as Fisher. Communication is not that easy, so it's sort of independent. The basic conclusions are the same. But they get there a different way. That's what we want to show. And there's a role for the interest rate. So let's see what this is all about. So the Cambridge economists said money serves two purposes. Keynes will add a third. The Cambridge economists had two purposes. One, it's a medium of exchange. That's how you get there. That's this role here. This is a medium of exchange function.
I can't read what you I'm sorry.
That's all right. You don't have to be sorry. I'm going to be sorry. I can't read it either. Pagoo, P-I-G-O-U.
Yeah, I got the
Basic conclusion the same. Get there a different way. roll for interest rate.
Oh,
That's the worst sport ever. I didn't mean to make a little heart above my eye, but it came out that way. I don't like these glasses, they don't look them over, I'm looking at school mom. Medium exchange, what else? I can name that tune in Store of Value. Someone had no notes. That was good. So you're too young to never name that yet. Store of wealth would be better. That's what I meant. Same thing. This is the difference from Fisher. This is what differs from Fisher. From the classical economists, generally, Fisher in particular. So they thought that as wealth goes up, you store part of it as money. So in that sense, it's no different from what we did before. We can say that this means that money demand as a store of wealth is, say, K2 times P1. So again, we're just saying that when wealth goes up, you store part of it as M, and it's a constant fraction. So when your income goes up, part of that goes into wealth. Part of that extra income goes into money. And then you have also the money demand for transactions. And that's, say, K1 PY. So far, we haven't added anything. Money demand is still K1 plus K2 times PY. It's still KPY. K is a different number, but fundamentally it's the same theory. You see that? We haven't fundamentally changed anything. We just added a different reason for holding money. We just say, well, part of the transactions are financial transactions, so we'll hold more for those too. The difference is, but it's not the same, because the Cambridge economists so how it differs. Basically, we're going to say that K2 depends upon the interest rate. Now, in what way? When the interest rate goes up, do you think K2 should be bigger or smaller? If you think through what you learned about money demand in your 300 course, you already know the answer. I'll give you a hint. So now the question is, why is it negative? Interest rate's the opportunity cost of holding money. It's what you could earn on a financial asset. So when the interest rate goes up, you want to hold less of it as money. So when the interest rate goes up, holding money is more costly. Holding M instead of instead of, let's say it this way, an interest-bearing asset is more costly. So you hold less than. That is K2 goes down. This is what I learned. Stick with your material and you go up here. So we can think of Fisher as M equals K Py, and Cambridge as M equals K I Py. I goes up, K. Now, I've probably given the Cambridge economists more credit than they deserve by writing it down this explicitly. When you read the Cambridge literature, it isn't this formal of a statement. It's way more vague than this when they talk about it. It's verbal. It's not a mathematical model in the modern sense and so on. But if you read it long enough and interpret what they're saying, this seems to be what they're saying. But there's a clear difference between the two approaches for the role of the interest rate. The Cambridge economists clearly have a role for the interest rate through the store of value function. And the classical economists in the US don't recognize that and mainly just have the quantity theory as their basis. And so the classical economists tend to use the quantity theory for everything. Okay. Then Keynes will follow in this tradition. Keynes is going to sort of clean this up and explain why this interest rate belongs in there more formally. So we'll develop a better model of this soon when we have Keynes. Let me just pause for a second, ask a different question. Is velocity a constant? Is it okay to assume V equals V bar in the short run, like we've said? Depends on how you measure it. If you look at GDP over M1, the answer is no. It doesn't look very stable. It goes up and it jumps around a lot in the short run. If you look at M2 though, GDP over M2, this is better until 1990. And then even it goes screwy in the 90s. We're not sure why. Well, I think I know why. So, yes and no. And it's better lately. But there does seem to be this period of time in the 90s where the M2 velocity was all screwed up. So, yeah, maybe it's an okay assumption. If you think the money supply is M2, you're probably okay assuming a constant velocity. If you think it's M1, and most people don't, but if you insisted that money was M1, then in fact, this assumption that is bar, you couldn't support it. Anyway, I just want to pause on that for a second. Let's go to Keynes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is velocity a very good indicator of the health of the economy? Like if you see it dropping or rising, like, I don't know, I I feel like it's not very significant.
Okay. Why not? Because I can't make the stupid thing work, that's why. Let me answer that with a picture. If it'll work. Oh yeah, I posted this yesterday. This is a peek inside what goes on inside the FOMC. Some Bob McTeer, who used to be on the FOMC, he writes at Economics at the New York Times. And this is a description. And down here, there's an even better one called Coming to the FOMC. And it's a piece he delivered at Willamette University in the 80s. And it's a really good description of what goes on in there. Take a look at that. For your question, this is velocity, M1 and M2. The shaded areas are recessions. And you're asking if velocity is a good leading indicator. It's at least a coincident indicator. Whether it leads or not is a different question. But it is pretty clear if you look at the gray areas that there's almost always, not always, but there's usually a drop in velocity prior to, but it can be a false indicator. Well, the big ones seem to be recessions. But you can get some false leads too. This is the rate of change over time. So M2 is sort of centered around 0. So that's the sense in which it's constant over time. If you look at that blue line long enough and hard enough, its average is above 0, so it's growing over time.
But if velocity is calculated with GDP, I mean...
So that's partly what's reflecting. But M changes too at the same time. So it reflects both of those. So it does tend to draw near recessions. If you look at I actually plotted it last night, and I was going to show it to you all, but it isn't taking a big nosedive yet. And so it didn't seem worthwhile to bring it to class. I actually went to the St. Louis Fed and grabbed M2, and then I grabbed GDP. M2 was monthly, so I made it quarterly and divided the two. I didn't see much. But yeah, it's not a great indicator, but it does have an effect. Keynes and the Keynesians. So what's the Keynesian theory of money demand? So Keynes follows in the Cambridge tradition. And he says there's 3 reasons for holding money. There's 3 motives. There's a transactions motive. And this is just MD for transactions. This is just the same old KPY. Nothing new under the sun here. There's a precautionary motive, and that's one that's sort of new. And again, he thought this was just some constant. These are different constants. You could put little 1s and 2s on them if it confuses you to use a K in both cases.
Is the reason that those are both number 1?
No, just me. because I can't write 2's without breaking the chart. So, you need to have liquid assets around in case of emergency. So if your roof goes bad, or you need a new water heater or something like that, it's nice to have some cash around. You go on a trip, you probably don't take just exactly the amount of money you need for food and motel and gas. You probably take a little extra as a precaution. It's those precautionary balances he has in mind. And the more income you have, the more money you need for precautionary balances. The one, though, that really makes the difference is speculative. And that's where we're going to spend a little time. So the third reason is speculative. This is that wealth component. So he's going to follow the Cambridge economist, but he's going to really emphasize I. So we're going to draw a picture of this. We're going to put money demand for speculative purposes here and an interest rate up. And this is going to be for an individual. This is not the whole economy. This is just one person. We'll aggregate soon over everything. Now, Keynes thinks that all of you, and they're not the same number, have some idea of some normal long-run interest rate. Some average interest rate that the economy will go towards. So we'll call that I normal. And it's different for everyone. If everyone had the same I normal, you'd never be able to sell or buy or sell financial assets. Now, if I is greater than I normal, what do you expect to happen to the price of bonds? What's the relationship between the interest rate and the price of bonds, the price of financial assets?
Inverse relationship.
It's an inverse relationship. When the interest rate goes up, the price of financial assets goes down. The easiest way to realize that is just write down, how do you price an asset? It's the present discounted value of all future payments, right? So the present value is just the sum of the returns over 1 plus I to the end, to the t. T equals 1 to t. So when I goes up, the value goes down. You paid $100 for a bond, it has a coupon rate of $10. So when you bought it, the interest rate was 10%. Okay? So you've got this thing, it's worth $100, the interest rate's 10%, because it pays $10 per period. Now the interest rate goes up to 20%. How much would somebody pay you for that bond? If they spend $100 on a new bond, how much do they make per month? $20? So how many of your bonds would they need to make $20? 2. So what's your bond worth? $50. At a rate of a $10 payment, at a 20% rate of interest, is only worth $50. So the value of your bond is the interest rate went from 10% to 20%, went from 100 to 50. So as the interest rate went up, the price of bonds goes down. Silence is uncomfortable, but it often brings questions. Okay, well then. So you would expect the price of bonds to, what do you expect the interest rate to do? It's above I normal. You expect the interest rate to fall, so you expect the price of bonds to go up in the future. So are bonds a good buy today? Well, yeah, because I'm going to make money on it, I think. See, what happens in financial markets is I have this IN, you have this one. And the interest rate's there. What do I think is going to happen? I think the interest rate's going to go up. So I think the price of bonds will go down. What's this person think? They think the interest rate's going down, so what do they think? The price of bonds will go up. So I say, I want out. And they say, I want in. And we have a market. If everyone had the same eye, what would happen? We'd all have the same expectations, then why would they buy it? We'd all be indifferent. We'd all have the same outlook in the future, so there'd be no reason to trade. So it's these differences in the perceptions about the future that cause people to take different sizes of the bets. So this is the way Keynes is seeing these investment markets. That's what's driving them. So bonds are a good buy. Now what about if you're down here? What if I is less than I normal? You expect the price of bonds to go, if I is less than I normal, you expect the price of bonds to go down. So do you want to be in financial assets? What do you want to do here? Sell your bonds, get into money, wait for the price of bonds to fall, and then go buy them again, because they'll be cheaper. You're $100 now, you have 10 of them, you got $1,000. Get your $1,000, wait for the price to go down to 50, and then buy 20 of them. You'll be better off. Okay. So let's suppose then, so what we're looking at is a person has a certain amount of wealth. And we're trying to decide how much of that wealth should go in money and how much should go in bonds. So this is their financial wealth. Bonds is a catch-all for all interest-bearing assets. So this is just all securities, and I'm just calling them bonds. If you want to think of these as stocks too, that's fine. It's just all interest-bearing assets. So the question is, how much should I have in each one? And the interest rate is going to determine how much is in each one. Now for Keynes, there's this flip-flop behavior. Let's go back to one individual. So here's IN. Whenever the interest rate's below here, what do you want to be in? Money or bonds? Down here, you expect a capital loss. When the interest rate goes up, the price of bonds will go down. So you don't want to be in bonds, you want to be in money. So all of your money should go there. Now what about up here? Where do you want to be? You want to be in money or bonds? What happens to your money demand? Now you'll hold all bonds. So you either hold all M or all B, depending upon whether you're above or below I normal. Now the switch point isn't literally right at IN. I've sort of sloughed over one tiny point. If a bond earns interest rate of 10%, the bond earns an interest rate of 10%, and you expect an 8% capital loss, you're still going to make 2%. So it's actually, the switch point's actually a little bit lower here because there's going to be an interest rate on the bonds. So So I'll come back to this next time.